right, howdy folks. For calculus, we're in the middle of doing the derivative rules. These are the rules, all the rules for derivatives. And you just got to know all these rules for derivatives. No matter what kind of function you're given, you should be able to look at that function, sit down with a pencil and a piece of paper and be able to write out the derivative of that function. That's just a normal part. That's a basic level thing in any calculus class. If you cannot just sit down with any function and just write out the derivative, then you have a lot of things that you need to learn before you continue in calculus. Well, one of the most important rules is called the product rule. Now, this is what I call an advanced rule. It's not really an advanced rule, it's just that it's not one of the basic, it's just not the power rule or the trig rules or the logarithm rules. This is actually a rule that puts many of those functions together in a more complicated kind of function, okay? Now, the product rule is basically a situation where your function, whatever function you're dealing with, is the product of two functions. So you might have y is equal to the function f of x times the function g of x. Oftentimes, this will be the way that you see it in a calculus textbook. An example of this would be something like y is equal to, let's say, 5x to the third power times sine of x, okay? So as you can see here, you have two functions. One of the functions is a polynomial function. The other function is a trigonometric function, and they are being multiplied by each other. So we need a special rule for finding the derivative of this function because it is a more complicated kind of function, okay? So we're going to use the product rule. Now, I have my own way of describing this, and if you want to use my way, then I'm fine with that. What I do is I say that it's y is equal to, this function is equal to the first function times the second function. Okay, the first function times the second function. That's how I think about it in my mind. Okay? Now, let me tell you what the derivative is not. I want to warn you, do not write this down. But I want to tell you that this is not how you find the derivative. You do not find the derivative of a product, a function that is a product of two functions, by simply doing the derivative of the first function and then multiplying it by the derivative of the second function. That is not how you find the derivative. So, dy dx here, dy dx is not equal to, it is not equal to 15x squared times cosine of x. Although that's what you are going to want to do. That's what you're going to want to do in your calculus class. And if you can't remember what the product rule is, that's probably what you're going to do. And I'm telling you right now, it's going to be wrong. So the right thing to do is to memorize and practice and understand the product rule so that you don't get stuck in a situation where you do that on the test that you take. Okay, because that is wrong. Okay? All right, so if this is not how we do the derivative, what is the product rule? All right, well, let's go over here. I'm going to say it first, then I'm going to do it on the board. The derivative of a product of two functions is the derivative of the first function times the second function, as is, not the derivative. So the derivative of the first function times the second function plus the first function times the derivative of the second function. Okay, so let me write this down. The function, or the derivative of a product of two functions, y prime is going to be the derivative of the first function, so first prime, times the second function. Okay, plus the first function, not the derivative of the first function, times the derivative of the second function. So, first prime times second plus first times second prime. Okay? If you did it in function notation here, your derivative, y prime, would be the derivative of the first function, f prime of x times g of x plus f of x, not the derivative, right, times g prime of x. So each function in each one of these that's added together, basically you're multiplying the two functions, and one of them is the derivative, and then plus, then multiply them again, and the other one is the derivative. So let's do the derivative of this one right here. dy dx, the derivative of 5x cubed times sine of x, is going to be the derivative of the first, which is 15x squared, times the second function, sine of x, plus the first function, 5x to the third power, times the derivative of the second function. Derivative of sine of x is cosine of x. And so the derivative of this is going to be 15x squared times sine of x plus 5x cubed times cosine of x. And that would be the instantaneous rate of change of this function. Let's do one more example, shall we? Okay, we've got y equals 3 to the x power times sine inverse of x. So our derivative, dy dx, you may want to pause this and see if you can do it yourself. All right, so remember, it's the derivative of the first times the second plus the first times the derivative of the second. So here, it's the derivative of the first, so the derivative of 3 to the x power is 3 to the x power times natural log of 3, times the second function, times sine inverse of x, plus the first function, 3 to the x power, times the derivative of the second function, which is 1 over the square root of 1 minus x squared. And so this crazy looking thing, and you could move this up into the numerator if you wanted to, or you can just leave it like that. This is the derivative of this. And now you can see that there's no way that you can possibly do the product rule without knowing all of your individual rules for inverse trig functions and for exponential functions and for logarithmic functions and the power rule and for trig functions. If you don't know your basic derivative rules, you will never be able to do the product rule or the other ones are the quotient rule and the chain rule. You'll never be able to do these more advanced rules, these combination rules, if you don't know the basic derivative rules. So it's very important. Just sit down for a couple hours, push your friends away, push everything away, just sit there with a bunch of problems and find the derivatives so that you can get it stuck in your head, okay? All right, I'll see you in the next video for the quotient rule.